So after it'll prompt you for your password for the one you created for the VeraCrypt volume. Once that's done, it will open up and it will actually pop up with just saying that SDA2 is now LVM. Then we can have all. And then, because with a setup for LVM, logical volume management setup, so that way we can have boot, which will actually be inside of root, and home and swap all inside of the VeraCrypt container. Then we go ahead and create the volume group. And now for the size of your swap, depending on how much RAM you have, and if you want to be able to do hibernate, which varies depending on the system that you actually have. Because I've had some systems where it had nothing to do with MADDES or anything like that. It just did not want to hibernate through Ubuntu, which I guess is probably why Ubuntu actually went away from having that as a standard option. So you have to kind of do a few side steps. But for my system, we'll say I have 16 gigs of RAM. And if you do, you're probably better off to say, like, maybe 18, a little bit bigger. And then you're just going to name that swap. And then the size of your root, depending on what you like to install for programs and whatnot, I just throw them down 25. Now, with it being a logical volume management and all inside the same volume, you are able to shift the sizes relative to one another. So say the whole thing is 320 gigabytes, and you go ahead and set up 18 for swap, 25 for root, and the remainder for home. Now, if you want to go ahead later on and make your root larger, then you can go ahead and shrink down your home. If there's, if you haven't filled it all the way up, you can shrink that down and then expand your root all within inside the same volume without having to reformat or anything of that nature. And with this 100% free, that is just saying, give the remainder amount without having to specify it ourselves to home. Once that's created, we will go ahead and actually make the swap partition. And now we'll set up the swap space, and then we can now you can choose what you want to use for your file system. I've tested it with ext4, and we go ahead and I apologize, I'm trying to look at another screen for my commands that I typed in while I was trying to get everything set up. Now, the reason why I am mounting it on the mount dev mapper vg-root on /mount MNT is that's just a a generic mount location that's available for on the live system where nothing else is already there. And then I go ahead and make a directory, just mount/home. And then we also mount that as well. And then at that point, we would actually use that ubiquity --no bootloader. And then the screen would pop up, and it would ask us, you know, as far as going through the normal installation. And that's where you now see, when we go back to the slides, that you see the dev mapper vg-home, the dev mapper vg-root, and it's asking about if you want to mount those partitions. We want to select no. And then you can see I tried highlighting it on the no button. And when it asks us, do you want to, what type of installation we want to have, we select something else and then continue. And then here, I selected vg-home ext4, and I'm going to go ahead and tell it what we want to use it for. We want to use it as an ext4 journal file system, and then we want to have the mount point as home. Then we just go through and just do the rest as well for the root. And then the swap, I just brought that up to show that that is what it's already set as swap, but just so that way it was clear. You can click format on those right there. Obviously, they were just created, so it's not necessary, but it will probably bring it up anyways, letting you know that if there's anything on there, it will get formatted. And then it tells you that the swap will be formatted as swap. And then here we are with the actual installation starting. And once it's finished, depending on your system, might take a little while, we will select continue testing. We do not want to hit restart now because we haven't installed any bootloader. But if by any chance you did happen to hit restart right now, all would not be lost. You would just need to reboot with the live system like we're doing right now and open it back up using the cryptsetup through the terminal, and open it back up and then just simply continue on from where we are now. So you wouldn't have to redo everything if you hit restart now, but it just won't. It will not boot. Yeah, and like I said, William Paul Liggett, he's been using it for a while, and so when we set up his, this is some of the examples that we had set up. I think I can get some better format. 1 second. So at this point, it's pretty much been more or less a standard install, except for having it installed inside of VeraCrypt. And then now is where I would actually go ahead and use my devs packages that I have available. And let me try to see if I can pull something up for that as well. All right, well, we'll go through this now. Yeah, these are just a few examples of when we set up his system. There's a couple here coming up that actually show what he may have chose. And I will also go back to that actually because that brings up a good point. For right now, it's not necessarily a limitation of MADDES. It's just right now, if you look here for the encryption algorithm setup, the one that starts with a K, that is not available inside of GRUB yet, but all the other options are. So if it has that one with a K, that would not be okay to boot from. But the Camilla and Serpent, AES, Two Fish, all of those are available. Just I haven't wrote the module for the K encryption yet. And originally, when I started MADDES and everything like that, that was not even an option. Neither was the Streebog for the hash algorithm. Just to kind of skip ahead now, I know I didn't show you how to install the rest of MADDES yet, but this is what it would look like when you go to start. Just to kind of glance over it, you'll see that it says, GRUB loading, welcome to GRUB. So here you just enter your password, and then where it says please wait, this may take a few minutes to decrypt. Now, if you chose the way that works is that currently, when you looked at the order of the different hashes, it goes through and it cycles through. It doesn't use multi-processor or anything like that, so it cycles through. So it starts with, I believe, the 512 first, the SHA-512, and it works on the iterations just like standard VeraCrypt. So what you would actually see is, what would happen is that if you type the wrong password, or if you choose a hash that's further down the list, say you chose the bottom one, it would take you longer to boot your computer because it goes through and it does a trial and error where it tries your password for the first option, then the second, then the third. And obviously, if you fail your password, it does give you a second attempt to enter your password again. And after you enter the correct password, this is actually just the normal GRUB splash screen where it will pop up and give you the option to choose your system. And if you're using VeraCrypt, I don't have it set up so you can only enter one password. You have to enter the password a second time. That is because the first password you enter actually unlocks your entire disk for GRUB. Now, when the computer boots and it goes from GRUB to the next stage, to the kernel, it does not transfer any of the information. There's a possibility to maybe try to store something away in memory somewhere and have it find it, kind of like what Windows VeraCrypt does. But at this time, you just enter the password a second time, or if you wanted to, you could store your password as a key file. Is another option in your initramfs. I guess just bear with me, and you could use that to unlock it as well. But the important thing to note is that your initramfs, your initram file system, all of that is all encrypted. The only thing that's left unencrypted is the initial bootloader which is just, has the modules for VeraCrypt and a few other basic modules. So usually it's less than 400K. Actually, for EFI it's around 400K, and then for BIOS it's like usually like 150 or something like that. I haven't had a chance to play with a TPM yet. I don't have a TPM setup, but I've thought of that, and also having a few other setups as well that use outside the computer for keeping a key secure. You can have a key, you could have your bootloader on one USB, and you can have a key stored on another encrypted, on another encrypted flash drive where the whole drive is VeraCrypt, and MADDES will be able to pull that up. Now, this is just, if you wanted to have your different boot settings, and obviously if you're using MADDES at the time, unless you have the secure keychain, you won't be able to use the regular secure boot, obviously, because it's not signed by using the secure shim that comes like from Ubuntu, because my modules are different. And you are able to also multi-boot. I haven't worked it out so you can use just MADDES to also boot VeraCrypt, say Windows 7 or Windows 10. That is something I don't have like in a release, but I do have it set up. Yes, I'll get that in a second. I was going to try to pull something up for the Crypt tab as well. I will actually see if I can. Hey, just one second. I'm actually going to try to get a couple other files as well that will show like an example of what Crypt tab looks like, and also your GRUB. Not GRUB config, because MADDES does automatically create that. You can modify it, but I will show you what your Crypt tab should look like, and also what your I'll just type it out here. I'll put, actually, instead of just trying to show it on the screen, I'll probably just try to copy it over, because it might be quicker for me to copy over what your Crypt tab should look like into the shared notes. I think that will be that much easier. Now, my Crypt tab is for a hidden volume. I will set it up. It's actually has two different devices it boots. Now, the LVM, you can kind of guess, is the main drive, and then I actually have it set so it can find it by the partition UUID, which is just stored inside either your MBR or through the GPT. And as you can see, this is set up for GPT. So the first thing you would do is you just, whatever you called it when you first created the dev mapper device. Now, we said dev mapper, we called it LVM, so I put the LVM first, and then I use part UUID, and then with the part UUID. And if you need to figure out what your part UUID is, you can use ls block and have it output your part UUID. Then for the key file, for my copy right now, I have it as none, and then there's a space, and then there's tcrypt, comma, VeraCrypt, and comma hidden. And in the standard crypt setup, there is no hidden, so like that's another one of my modified files where I changed how it creates and updates the initramfs. So all of that's able to be taken here. Now, if we had a key file, actually, I'll try to grab a copy of that after. another one with a key file for that. But this is just a basic setup. Like I said, this is one we would have just done. And now this Vera device down below, the Vera Dev, was just another device that I had set up for for testing. As you can see, it's got a short UUID, so that was for a USB device, probably a fat file system. Maybe there was a key file on there. And then I will also pull up a copy of the your grub file, not your grub config, but the actual file that is set to configure your grub. Now, after we've installed the main system, we would go in here Okay. So after we installed the main system, we would actually go ahead and we would actually install the MADDES files, which those are everything is set up nice and easy. It's just a few commands. And it allows you to actually, if you're not familiar with having to chroot into the other system, it's just a few commands where it starts off with setup the files, it runs all the commands, and then you type another command just to enter the chroot, and then once you're in there, you type another command to install MADDES. Then from there, you would just use Grub Install. And now if you went ahead and also had the EFI system like we have right now, what we'd want to do is once we're inside the chroot system, we would want to mount the dev SDA1, and we would want that on boot EFI, and then we would run grub install, and then we could do grub install with just our target if we have the EFI system, just like that, and that would actually install grub. And what I'll put down here is where this file is actually located, and what we modify here is this is for grub. So for doing the grub install, you actually have to change a few things in order to allow MADDES to work. I just had it set up like that, so if people were using grub, they wanted to use this on a regular system, they didn't possibly have it set up so they would try to install to a system that doesn't actually have the ability to boot, and also for someone to realize what they're using for the whole system. Now, if you'll notice, I just posted a decent amount of the file, and what would really be changed is we would initially need to add this line right here where it says grub enable crypto disk. I'll just put a few lines next to it, and I'll indent that just so people can see. And also the line above it, a couple above it, the grub enable crypto disk MADDES ops. And currently, it's actually able to find itself. So technically, this was for also compatible with an older version of MADDES, where it says crypto-device. That's an option I added to the grub install, and also grub make config or update-grub. And that was just for us. Initially, it needed, initially when I had it set up, before I was able to get all the enhanced automation done, is that you had to tell it what the device was, because Grub itself, if you ever try to install to a device that is hidden or is like VeraCrypt, where there actually is no visible header data, that you'll realize that it cannot find itself. And so initially I used to have to tell it, what device it was. but now actually where this has the ampersand down, the hash down here, that it just says equals to Y, and that actually also works. Now I have it upgraded enough that it can find itself and realize that it is a VeraCrypt device, or it will realize that it's a LUKS detached header device or a plain DM crypt, and be able to complete the install. But I still have it set up so you start still telling it to do its options. And those are the two major changes that you have to just put here, so that way you can do the grub install. And after you did the grub install, all you'd have to do is just type update-grub, and then this would create your grub config file as well. So now you have your bootloader installed, and we've changed our cryptab file. So now that we've done the cryptab and the default grub file, you can run update-initramfs. I usually do -u-k all. That's just so that way, usually it comes with 2 kernels standard, and that way you have your newest kernel and the fallback kernel updated to have MADDES features. The reason is because if you don't, and you have an issue later on down the road and you don't get that upgraded, then the fallback kernel won't have the ability to actually boot your system. Now, what I was trying to do is also pull up a copy of the cryptab for key files. Now, if you wanted to use key files, you would first go ahead and you can actually do it from your system while it's still running. So after you've already booted up and everything, you can run it from there. What you would do is you would change your grub file and say where it says the MADDES ops and you have your crypto device. For us, this should actually be 2. You just put a comma there, and then key file, and then you'd go ahead and list out wherever your key file is located on this file system. Then you would run grub update, grub install, and update grub again. And then you also have to, because update-initramfs and grub, they're 2 different systems, so they don't talk. I'm looking to have a version of MADDES that will have a GUI that when you update one, it will update it automatically. But we would have to go ahead and then also change your cryptab. And for the cryptab, what you would type is just 1 second. Let me get that. You would just go ahead and add it past the hidden. Now this is for a hidden system. I'll just take that out so that way it doesn't confuse anyone, since we didn't set up a hidden system. Yeah, you would actually just write tcrypt key file and equals, and then you can actually have a list of them. So you can have multiple key files if you want to. I don't have it set up. It's not set up for you to read like a whole directory, but if you wanted to have multiple key files, you can have them. It can be on multiple USBs. So maybe you wanted to have a system set up where you want to have it so 2 people have to be present. You could have it set up so 1 key file is on one person's USB and another key file is on another person's USB. And this is where you go ahead and add it. And the same thing for MADDES. You just set it up for there, and you tell it what the device is. Now, the best thing to do is for the initramfs for inside a cryptab. That is fine if you go ahead and actually copy a copy of your key file and you put it in your, say, your root directory, or in a root key file directory, and keep it so only root has access to it, because that way when it goes and looks for it to update your initramfs every time, it just grabs it off of your hard drive. Now that is secure because your system's always Oh, I'm sorry. I was looking back at the public chat. It only shows up with one screen at a time. What I did was I apologize. I was actually modifying some of the code up top. That way, but I'll just copy it down. That way it's below the, every line will be new. So here, as you can see where I have the VeraCrypt equals key file, that's where you go ahead and actually, you could use a local key file. It'd be the same exact key file as the one stored on a USB, but the purpose of this is so that way when the system does, you know, apt update, apt upgrade, when your system just does normal upgrades and it needs to get a new kernel, it can go here to grab it. Because if you have it stored only on your USB, it will look for your USB to grab it. So you'd have to plug your USB in every time it does an upgrade or an update, which, you know, is more of a hassle than necessary, because your initramfs is encrypted inside your regular root when the whole system is powered off anyways. And for the and then for if we want to go ahead and add them, like I was talking about before for Grub, that was actually where you would type and say what the device is. So say for this key file, I'm actually going to go ahead and say it's on whatever the device is mapped to it right now. So say I have a USB on media. It's just a USB device. So like media, you know, USB key, and the file is called, just simple key file dot text or bin. You might have a binary key file, or it could be a media file. VeraCrypt does allow, for VeraCrypt, it does allow up to a megabyte of data to be read in. Now, if your key file is 300 megabytes, it will only read the first megabyte. And so I have it set up for Grub to do the same as well. So you would just do the same thing there. And the point of that is that you actually want the Grub to go ahead and look for the key files, because the way I have MADDES set up is that when you go ahead and do Grub install, it's going to actually go ahead and read that Grub enable cryptodisk MADDES ops command line, and it will go ahead and have the boot image stored with not the file itself, but it will go ahead and grab the partition UUID, so that way it can find the device, because say it's encrypted, and then it will automatically figure out when it reads it now, because when you do a Grub install, sorry to backtrack, but when you do a Grub install, not an update Grub, but just a Grub install, so say you get a new version of MADDES, that is when you would have to go ahead and plug in your key files and open them up. So if they're VeraCrypt open, you can use the VeraCrypt software itself, or you can use cryptsetup or ZuluCrypt as well. So that's the only time you actually have to have the USB key file installed. And also, if you change your key files, you would also need to update that both in the crypt tab and also inside of the default Grub inside your command line right here for the Grub enable cryptodisk MADDES ops. Like I said, you can use as many key files as you want, or on as many devices as you want, and the order is not specific. It will just go ahead and open them all up. Now, if you do have it set up, so say this USB is actually encrypted with a VeraCrypt container, once it's opened and you're doing a Grub install, it'll find that file. It will realize it's using VeraCrypt, so it'll also tell Grub when it first boots up, hey, we need to find this. It will look for that partition UUID for your USB. If it's not located, then obviously it's going to tell you you can't find it. You will then go ahead and, if it is encrypted, it'll go ahead and ask for your passphrase. It'll open it up. It won't tell you, it will show you that it's open, but it won't do anything else. It will automatically grab the file, only in memory. It will not be stored anywhere else. It only grabs it for the RAM, and then goes ahead and loads it into the rest of the Grub modules, the VeraCrypt module, to then parse. And you can have it set up so if you only want to use a key file that's encrypted, or the key file doesn't have to be encrypted, but for safe measures, it is best to. You can use GRUB with a key file, without a key file, with a passphrase, with a PIM. You can have it set up so it will ask you your PIM as well. For those that aren't familiar, the PIM is a personal iteration multiplier. And what that allows is for VeraCrypt to have more or less iterations done while it's processing your hash. But that's all available, and you can also tell it here. This is where you would put that in on this command line right here. Is if you wanted it to ask you to enter a PIM, you would also type that there as well. I don't have the command right handy, but it's just simply query PIM, I believe is what it's listed as. So something like this, and then that way GRUB asks you, and that's also available to be added to the crypt tab as well. Just a simple query PIM. You can also have it set up so crypt tab actually has your PIM stored, so it doesn't have to query you again. But once again, that stays encrypted. For the GRUB-enabled crypto disk, it's best to have it ask you every time. That way, it's not known on the bootloader what your PIM is. Now, for the key files, like I said, you can have it set up so you have multiple key files, a single key file. They can be used with a passphrase or not. They can be stored on a detached LUKS device, or regular LUKS device, or plain dmcrypt, or VeraCrypt. Also, or just a plain flash drive, not encrypted. And for the VeraCrypt, once it goes ahead and grabs all that stuff, it will then go ahead and close out your USB. And once you actually boot, once it gets past that initial screen, you can actually pull your USB out, and it doesn't need required anymore. But it will just be required for every boot to get your key file. Let's see. Is there any other questions? I know that I kind of jumped around a little bit. I do apologize for that. And I know initially we set it up for a single boot system, but you are able to do the multi-boot. And so when we set up the system earlier for the, let me go try to find it kind of quick. For the EFI, you could just simply put that on a USB, and then that way you could have your hard drive set up for, there is no boot system on there. Everything would just be on a USB. So maybe you just have a MBR GPT header, and if you're able to get away with just using an MBR, so for regular BIOS, then you would just have a USB. If you're just using passphrases, that just has a GRUB bootloader on it, and that way you can go ahead and just simply have everything on a USB stick. And if you have a BIOS system and you want to do multi-boot, you can have it set up so the best way to do it is to possibly have multiple USBs for each Linux system that you want to boot. And if you want to multi-boot with Windows, the best option is to have the Windows bootloader actually installed on the hard drive, and then the remaining Linux installed on an MBR, installed on a USB, and just have it boot through that. That way you can, just have one USB for each bootloader. Now, you can use any of the USBs once you have MADDES installed on it to a boot an system, unless it has, like, say, a key file on it. You are able to so like what William's saying is that when he starts his computer without a USB, it just defaults to Windows, and the other Linux systems are hidden and encrypted. Now, one of the big things about this is the reason why you want to have plausible deniability or have the hidden system is just simply that when you have standard encrypted LUKS, actually at the beginning of a LUKS drive, it gives it away. See if I can just pull something up real quick and paste it. Just as an example for a difference between what LUKS drive will look like and what a VeraCrypt drive looks like. So I am not certain how well this is going to be formatted, just copying over into the shared file. I'll paste it at the bottom. This is just like a copy of a LUKS. As you can see, when I go ahead and I use dd disk dump just to go ahead and pull in partition number 15, I just selected byte size of 512, and it's obviously not all showing. And then if you look on the left, on the right hand side, you'll actually see the letters LUKS in capital. That's now if you look all the way to the left, you'll see the hex equivalent for that is that 4C55, 4B, 53, and then you'll see BABE. That's actually an identifier that as soon as any system looks for it, it knows it's encrypted. So there may be questions about whether or not it's encrypted, what's on there, and then you can't really deny the fact that you have encryption on there. Now for a VeraCrypt drive, it just shows as random data for the header because it's all encrypted. And you just try to pull up and copy it. Like I said, also I will have everything on maddes.tech pretty soon, and I hope that I will have a video set up where everything goes step by step. You can actually see from beginning to end. Done. What tools do you use to inspect boot sectors and see this directly? Oh, yeah, that's a good question. What I use is, you might see it at the beginning there. To see this directly, I used, you can see the command line I had out there. It's, Vera Ubuntu. It's my version, VeraCrypt of Ubuntu. And I just used sudo, because I was not at root at the time, dd, and then the if. Now, you have to be very careful with this, because if you type the wrong drive here as OF or IF, it will wipe it. So you want to go ahead and make sure whatever drive you're looking at, you inspect. And I have the byte size, like I said, for 512. That's just so I just have that set up so that way it only took out a little bit of data and you can actually inspect it. And then I have the vertical line for piping out, and then a space, and I have XXD. And the XXD means that it pipes it in so that way you can actually see it hex format as you see, so that way you can see the right-hand side with it in ASCII, and then the left-hand for hex. And the far left numbers, you'll see, zeros, and then 1, 2, 3, 4. That's actually the individual byte with the specific byte count of the location of that on the drive. And yeah, if you do use a DD, it would create an identical image of this. Yeah, it does create an identical image, and actually that's another good way to back up and actually create. So say right now if you're using a LUKS device, the best thing to do is actually start it with a live system, and you can actually open up your LUKS device just using cryptsetup. Open it up, but do not mount it. You can go ahead, and I have all this to show you how to set it up easily or to copy it. Pretty much, if you look in the shared notes, I'll just type something out kind of quickly, and we'll just use a fictitious drive. The Lux open, and then we'll be like, say it's dev SDA1 and it's Lux drive. And if we wanted to go ahead and actually back up this drive and convert it over to, say, VeraCrypt to use MADDES with, without having to reinstall or anything like that, you can just go ahead and transfer the data. I would go ahead and open it up, and then you have another drive. Now that that's open, you can DD, then the in file would be dev mapper Lux drive, and the byte size really depends on how fast your computer can process and also what the read speed is. Now, we'll just say you're good for 96, and a good way to tell how you're doing is status of the progress. And you want to read that whole thing, and now you want to go ahead and create a backup image of it. So the out file would be wherever your backup drive is. So I'm just going to say that we're on, we'll say it's media, backup drive, and then, Lux drive backup dot image, and that will actually go ahead and preserve your whole drive. Or even if it's not a Lux drive, it will do the same thing. If you go ahead and have it set up to wherever it says the Lux, the dev mapper Lux drive is whatever that file path is for whatever you're currently using. Once that's done, you can go ahead and verify that your copy is exactly the same as that image by just simply using the DD. I'll make the next command line for you as well. And what I would do is I would then go ahead and, now this does get rather time consuming, it can, but I would then go ahead and pipe that into, like, say SHA-512 some. And what that will do is that'll give you a hash of your whole drive's contents. So as long as you kept that as not mounted at this point, you can go ahead and verify what your input image is. And then you do the same for your backup image. So you just change your in file to your output to whatever your backup image was. And well, once again, we will do SHA-512 sum, and those two hashes should be exactly perfect. And if they are, then you have a one-for-one backup of your drive. At that point, you can go ahead and create a VeraCrypt container on another drive, or you could destroy that original one after you have your copy someplace safe and move your copy into the new VeraCrypt container, like how I showed you to create one before. And then that way you could then, after it's moved in there, you would then once again go ahead and verify that the new copy matches the old copy exactly. No, I don't think it would be a good idea to use a less secure, faster one like MD5. The main reason is depending on the size of your drive, I'm not sure how many bytes MD5 is good for before you could have a collision. Collision meaning that you have one input and you have, or multiple inputs, and you one input and you have multiple different outputs. Excuse me, you have multiple inputs and the same output. So that's why, obviously, if you're using terabytes or something like that, I'm not sure what the limit is, but I just know that obviously with SHA-512, you have yourself covered. You could also use, some of the other ones as well. I would just stick with, I noticed that for myself, the 512 was quicker than the 256 as far as for processing it when it was reading it. But yeah, I just do that. That way you can verify your image. And I've actually done this when I converted, actually before the last hope. I actually did the same thing. I had a Lux drive, and I copied everything out and then converted it over, just like I just said, to VeraCrypt. And then I just, while it was still opened, I ch-rooted in. That's change root. And like I said, with the debs files, that comes all in there. And then I went ahead and installed MADDES. And a couple of the big things that's different now is that I know I didn't get a chance to show it to you exactly, but well, I somewhat with the Grub enable crypto disk MADDES ops. Like I said before, you just have to do it actually on the command line with every Grub install. You just have to type that out for it to tell where the device was, and then I've updated it to you don't have to have it in there, but you can have at least a Y, so that way it knows to now you can have key files and the queries, and also for all the options that I gave for where the key files can be located. You can also have those located for the detached header as well if you're using a Lux drive. And if you want to, you can actually have it set up so on the version I've been running for a while, I don't have to use it with that one, but I have another version where you can actually have a detached device for a VeraCrypt drive. So you could have it so one password. If your computer boots up, it decrypts your data, but it would realize that would be a bad encryption key, so it wouldn't do anything. So you could show that you have nothing there, and then you have the good header backed up on another drive. So when you stick that USB in, it looks for that one instead. I guess it depends on how deep you want to go. But now some of these features that I talked about, I have more. Some are posted from my website, and then which is that maddes.tech, and others I just haven't used them enough to make sure that the different use cases work well without having any issues. But for the version I have now, and for the features I've been able to use these now for a very long time. Yeah, no, I understand. I did stay a little late, but yeah, thank you guys all for being here. You can also email me. If you look on my site, I have it under the about, and that's another thing as well. All my MADDES debs and everything like that, when I built them all, they are all GPG signed. So when everything gets put in, you have my key, you can verify it, and then everything is, secured, verified that I'm the one that built it. And then that's on my website. And then also it's also in the key rings for the various. Does anybody else have any other questions? I will also check to see too about getting the other step-by-step video once I get everything figured out with get a new capture card, I guess. That way maybe I can also try to see about posting that with this video, so that way everybody that was here for the workshop can also have access to that. Yeah, thanks, Will. Another option that you can also do, I guess, that I didn't say, is that you could have if you only have one hard drive, if you want to make it completely encrypted, you can actually have it set up so there is no MBR or GPT header. So the entire drive from beginning to end is encrypted, just looks like random data. And MADDES can find that, open it, and boot it. And inside, it's actually possible to have the MBR and GPT header inside the actual encrypted container. So you can still have your standard partitions if that's how you want to have it set up. but that takes a little bit different work with a couple different with system D and stuff like that. So it all depends on how many different systems you want to have get modified. Yeah, you're welcome, everybody. I appreciate you all being here. Is there any other questions anybody can think of that can maybe, if you have any questions about any possible features in the future or anything that you would maybe like to have, or no, I currently don't have a GitHub or anything like that. I just keep it all in-house. But I am looking to, once I actually have the rest of the code actually posted, I guess I'll probably just have it set up maybe through my site. I may do a GitHub, or similar. And I guess as far as stability too, if anyone's really wondering about that, like I said, I've had this on my system and a few other people that I know, and including one person that has about 0 to no experience with a computer, but he just knows the type of password when he boots up, and then type a second password, and then it clicks on a couple buttons to go to the web browser, and when it auto updates, I haven't had any issues, and that system's been using that for about a couple years or so, and that was actually an older version of MADDES, but it was just a simple maybe multiple layer encryption, but no key files or anything like that, just to keep it simple. So for so people of all abilities, want a little extra security, and that's pretty much what I set this up for. Was I just wanted to have a little extra security, and I guess it was a bit of a challenge. Yeah, like Will says, he's been using a triple boot, and for me, I have like some of my systems, it's like maybe 15 or 18 boot, just for all the different tests. And that uses EFI just because it's easier to pick which loader you want, just for testing. That is one benefit, I guess you could say, with the EFI, that if you do want to have it set up so there's different bootloaders, you can have it stored. I mean, at that point, it is pointing to your device, so the plausible deniability may kind of go down, but at the same time, there is no guarantee at the time that just because it's pointing there doesn't mean that that is actually anything anymore. Because if I wipe the drive with dev urandom or similar, there is no real difference. Or I can even re-encrypt it with, wipe it over with VeraCrypt and create an empty container and trash the header, and there's no way to tell any difference. Yeah, I'm still. My site is still under construction. It was just so let people know that it is still, like, I'm still updating it. It's a work in progress. That I haven't forgotten about it. It just with time constraints and being self-funded, I don't have any tech tycoons or anything like that currently funding me or anything like that. So it is on a free time basis. But I will have the files available soon. That includes like the basic packages for what I'll probably put first would be like the debs and the Debian packages, and also my setup files and everything like that. Will be for like Ubuntu 18.04. Then I'll look to make sure what I know. There were some changes with 20.04, which just had to do with cryptsetup, and so some of the crypt tab information that I gave earlier may not still be accurate. Actually, I know some of it won't be if you were trying to use their standard system. And that's the thing too, is that when I originally did all this, there wasn't really any support at all for like the VeraCrypt or anything like that through their setup. And I know now since then they've added some through cryptsetup for the initramfs tools. Yeah, is there anything else? I mean, now if you have any other questions, I can answer them. I know that there are other workshops going on or talks, but I am available if there are any other questions. I'm not sure if anybody uses Tails, the Amnesiac Incognito Live system, but I do have a setup where there's a version of MADDES that can work with Tails, so that way you have a Tails version where it's encrypted with MADDES, so there is no way to tell what it is other than just a basic Grub bootloader, which then chains into the Tails for it to boot as well. And I am looking to, do some more tests to have it so MADDES does boot the VeraCrypt Windows version, so that way you could just have MADDES for one and for all. Now, as far as if anybody has any questions about Mac or anything like that, I don't see, currently they don't support it in that fashion, and I think there would have to be a lot of back end work. Yeah, so I guess another feature like I did talk about was the hibernate. It does allow, like I said, it's hardware dependent. You can have it set up so it is encrypted hibernate. And what's great about that is like your swap is where it would hibernate to. That's all encrypted inside your VeraCrypt or detached Lux container. And that way it allows for, if you're in the middle of doing something and you need to, quickly let everything, shut down, but without losing anything, you can, if you're on a laptop, you can have it set up so you can close your lid, or anything like that. And when it reboots, it actually doesn't boot like it's encrypted initially, like it's hibernated initially. It boots like a fresh boot. So that way, there's no way to tell that you had it hibernated at the time when it was shut down. It will ask you for your passwords, just like a regular boot, and then once it gets past the splash screen for Ubuntu, where it asks you for your password, it will then let you know that, hey, it's resuming. I think it's on one of these slides here. Are there any other OSs that people are using? Besides the Kali and Debian and Ubuntu and Pure OS. Yeah, when you get to this screen, I don't know if you can see it on the slides. After that, it'll let you know that you're resuming from hibernating. And then you go ahead and just can log in. Yeah, does anyone have any more questions? Or can you think of any possible features you would possibly like to see? Or I know somebody mentioned TPM. Like I said, I've looked into doing that and also using something else that's similar. But if you also look at VeraCrypt site, they give you a little bit of a rundown about what some of the shortfalls for TPM possibly as well. I think one of the better options is possibly to have you have your whole boot system. If you are using a laptop or a desktop and you only have one driver, and if you have multiple drives, but you only have one main operating system, just have it. You could have the whole drive with just VeraCrypt container, and then have the USB to boot it. you would make it so there was no boot code even on the computer at all as well. So that way there wouldn't be anything to try to jump to, or that wouldn't be noticeable. Oh, yeah, and one of the benefits for the hidden system is that in one container, say you have for SDA2, you can enter one passphrase and it will open up, like, say, a fat file system where um, you know out of 80 gigs, maybe 20 gigs is reserved for that, um, and it looks normal. Obviously, at the end of it would be all random encrypted data, but if you had the whole thing encrypted to begin with, like it would be created, and say you have it set up so you only have a few files in there, you just haven't filled it up that much, I guess, as well. And then obviously the hidden part would be further back. That just allows you to have the ability to, give one passphrase for it to open, and then obviously you have another one to actually boot from. And I guess also another thing to note back to from the notes was just when I was explaining the LUKS and how it shows you everything. It also lets everybody know what you're using for what level of encryption you're using. If you're using just obviously a single algorithm for LUKS, and then also what your hash is. So it does, with the strong enough password, also it makes it more difficult to crack. But the problem is that it also lets the attacker know, what you're using without having to try. Where if you're using detached headers, then they obviously can't see anything. Or if you're using, VeraCrypt, then they don't know what you're using for encryption, if any at all. So they could be just, trying to unlock a drive that is simply random data, or maybe they're just going to keep trying and say, hey, maybe it's maybe he's using, SHA-512 for hash, or maybe he's using Whirlpool. But with all those tries and iterations, it takes a lot of computer power and time to go ahead and try to run, possibly hundreds of thousands of iterations for every possible passphrase, including the fact that you may or may not have key files, or you may or may not use a PIM. And also, the biggest factor is that there might even be nothing there. So it comes down to, a cost-benefit analysis, I guess, with, is there anything here or not to begin with. Another feature for MADDES too is that that will be out available too, is that it can also, without even having to use the part UUID, it can in one of the versions be able to find the device or possible VeraCrypt devices without actually having to know it at install time. The only problem is that obviously if you have 10 and you're trying to use it, so it's like a magic way of it testing each device to see, hey, is this passphrase right? It may take a lot of time, but you can also have it set up so it will ask you for a guess. Do you think it's try partition 7 first? Now none of that will be stored on the bootloader, so it will just be a generic question. If this is possibly a VeraCrypt, okay, there's 10 possible VeraCrypt devices. Which one do you want to try to unlock? And you can just say all, which would be very time consuming, or just simply, if your device is number 7 to boot from a partition, then just type 7 or 2 or any of those. No, I think that's probably about it. I guess there's not really any other questions. Yeah, thank you for everybody for coming, and I will get a real demonstration video from beginning to end with all the different options available, including also PDF as well. The video will just pretty much be going through all the steps more or less in real time, That way you can follow along, view that first and give you an idea of what to expect. Obviously today you have a better idea now, but that way you can review that and then start using MADDES Secret Lair. All right, well, thank you, everyone.